Wonderful. All right. Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday. I'm glad to be with you all for our second live stream for the Summer Art Journal Snacks box. Today, we're going to focus on poetry. And if you feel like you're not a poet, don't worry. We're going to do a lot of things that will invite kind of poetic language and use of language that doesn't require you to be an excellent poet. If you are an excellent poet, awesome. We would love to have you share some of your poems with us today as part of what we're creating. Okay, so as Lee teased, we're going to play with the chat a little bit today, in that I would love you to think for a moment about art supplies and put a couple words into the chat that you think of when you think of art supplies. And then we'll collect all these later. I'll post them on Mix, and we'll see what kind of poems we can make from the words that you all come up with. So we'll create a poem about art supplies as a collective thing, okay? So you can do that into the chat. As it comes to you, go ahead and put it in there. Maybe designate these are the words for the poem, so we're not like, what is this weird question that this person is asking, okay? So that's what we'll do in the chat to start with. And I'm going to go ahead and get started with the first type of poem, which is a found poem. Okay, so I have a page that I've gotten ready here with some stuff from the wonderful newspapers that we got from Newspaper Club, the How It Works. I thought that would be a good starting point for playing with a poem. And we're going to work with a found poem. And I have this page from a book that's about ducks, but it's also about color. So I thought this might be a good one to work with for a little found poem. And some of you have seen me do some of this before for kind of found text, but it's a little different when you're doing it for a poem, because you're not keeping big pieces of the text. You're really narrowing it down a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to glue this on. The other stuff that's on this page that you might see are the edges of a map. I like the way that looks as I was cutting the map up for something else, so I saved it and put it on here. Okay. So I chose this text because it just felt like there were some interesting things in here that would work well for a poem. Like the phrase, "you can't believe." That's kind of an interesting way to start out a poem. And are true till you see the colors. Boldness unsurpassed. So you would think, those of you that know me, that I would be keeping the parts about the bird, but I'm trying to not get too attached to the bird part of this text and just looking for interesting words that go with a poem. So when you're doing this, one way to do it so you don't get too attached to the text is to go from the bottom up. And I try when I'm doing this also to not read the text beforehand, because when you do that, then you kind of know what's coming. And you end up not doing something quite as interesting. Okay, So the poem I have now is "You can't believe are true until you see the colors boldness unsurpassed in such a way as almost to conceal a slight touch, add life to what otherwise would be of rare distinction. By contrast, what might seem at first much simpler pattern, this true only contrast, seemingly no less delightful, brings out the whole. It all has style, true, do not really clash with our own look." So kind of an interesting little poem. I'm not sure what it means yet, but that doesn't matter. You don't have to decide what it means yet. So then the next step becomes getting rid of or eliminating the rest of the text. And there's so many different ways that you can do this. You can take a big bold pen and mark them all away. You can leave them just enough so that if you wanted to go back and see what else is there, you'd be able to. I think for this one, I'm going to go in and pretty much obliterate it. So I have an alcohol ink marker. And because this is a printed book, you will be able to see the text a little bit because it's printed onto the page. So it's a little bit like a texture that'll show up. But this will start the process of really only keeping the text that is relevant to my poem. So some of you art history buffs joining today may be able to remind us all in the chat the art movement of this. So if you know, go ahead and put it in the chat. We're going to play with another thing that that same art movement also did. So one of the things that comes up for me when I'm doing this is sometimes when I'm blacking out the text that I'm not keeping, I see other things. I'm like, oh, I wish I had used that word, but you have to just go with it. No regrets, just moving forward with the text that you selected. Don't make it too precious. A lot of times when we're art journaling, when we get stuck, it's when we get too attached to things having a certain outcome. And I find that the journaling process is a lot more satisfying, helpful, useful, when I can get out of my own way and just let the page evolve as it evolves, right? Try not to plan it out too much. Try not to second guess my initial idea, and also try not to get upset if a page doesn't quite come out how I wanted. I've said this before, but again, this is just so different than working on like a finished drawing or painting, right? You don't like how the page turns out, you just turn the page. Maybe you paint over it. Maybe you just let it sit there. So you can see me going back in now. I'm adding a little bit more dark around the edges of these. So now I have the text that I want to keep popping forward a little bit more, and the text I don't want receding into the background a little more. Now I'm going to use a little bit of a wax crayon to just go over that gray alcohol ink. And this will do a little bit more to obscure that other text. Some of it might still be slightly readable. I'm not painting it out with like acrylic paint, which is a choice that you could make, or take a big thick paint pen and go over it with that. We might do that later. So the next thing that I like to do when I've created a found poem, especially if it's on a page that has something else there, is to decide, okay, now how do these two pages relate to each other? What's the connection? So I initially put this here thinking a little bit meta, right? Thinking about here's how the found poetry works. But now I wonder how I could relate the text here with the actual poem, right? And so one of the things that I'm thinking about is this line here, true till you see, and the word believe, and whole, and look. So it's kind of about maybe trusting your eyes or trusting what you see. How does it work? It works when you see what's there, right? You can experience it firsthand, perhaps. So that's maybe a theme that I could work with on this page. I would like to add a little bit, since the text here from the map is this kind of reddish color, I think I want to add a little bit of red there. So the black will create a little resist. And I'll just start adding a little bit of color. Hopefully you aren't getting too much construction noise from the background in my world right now. It's actually the person here who built the studio that I'm coming to you all live from. He's here this weekend working on something in the main house. So the wax crayon is a little more scribbly. This is a little bit more organic shapes. And none of this page has anything at all to do with the ducks that were being discussed in the original text. So don't feel like whatever the book page came from that you worked with is what you have to use, right? You can make the words mean whatever feels relevant for you. Okay. A little bit more. All right, so I'm gonna let that one sit aside for a bit. We'll come back to it. I think this is just watercolor, so I feel comfortable turning the page. So at another spot, I'm ready to go for something. And what you can see on this page so far, something that I turned over from the previous page. So if there's existing text, sometimes I'll leave it there because maybe it will end up being important or relevant, or maybe it'll just end up fading into the background. On this side, I sewed this page with my sewing machine. So those zigzag stitches there go onto both sides. I was actually sewing on this side, but this is the back of those zigzag stitches. And then there's a little bit of Olo marker bleeding through here. One of the things that I love about the Olo markers is if you use it not on alcohol marker paper, I can't decide if I like the front page of the Olo marker marking or the back page better because it's just on the back side, I think really subtle and very beautiful the way the colors blend together. So I really love what's happening with that. And I thought that this page would maybe be good to play with the idea of a haiku poem. So just as a reminder for your haiku, you should have 3 lines. So 3 lines first line is 5 syllables. Second line is 7 syllables. And the third line is 5 syllables. So when I write a haiku into a piece of art that I'm working on, or anywhere really, I try to just write it. I try to not think about it too much. However, I didn't want you all to be seeing my thinking process. So for the sake of today, I actually pre-wrote one so that you wouldn't see me counting on my fingers. How I generally do this. I'll count on my fingers as I'm composing. So I would love to challenge you all to write a haiku about your journal, about your art journal, which is what I did today for this one. So I wrote, my journal is home. I carry it everywhere. My journal is home. I carry it everywhere. Fill pages with life. So that's what I came up with for my haiku. I encourage you all to think about creating a haiku about your journal or about an art journal in general. And remember, it's 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. So if you want to try that right now while you're working, you can think about it as you're playing on the page. Or of course, you can think about it later. And I would love to have us share them on Mix.
Hey, Erin, this is Lee chiming in.
Hey.
Hey, so just one thing. I don't know if it's the background noise where you are, but we can't hear the background noise, which is good, but you're coming in a little bit low. So if there's any way for you to speak a little bit louder, that'd be super helpful.
I sure can. Let me just check my input volume also. Is that better?
Oh, yeah, I think that does sound better.
There we go. Okay. Sometimes my input volume gets turned way down, and sometimes I keep it down so that people Zooming with me in normal times don't have to get the parrots at full volume. I'm also where my face is pointing away, so hopefully.
Cool. Yeah, this sounds a lot better. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. Well, that was just my quiet poetry voice before. Now you're gonna get my loud art making voice.
Totally fine. Thanks.
All right. So I'm gonna keep playing with the marabou on this page. And like we showed before, if you layer it while it is still, I don't want to say wet, but while it's unset, you can get some interesting blends of colors. I'm going to play with maybe 3 or 4 different colors on this. And I'm building up these layers pretty thick. I'm trying to squish in some of the little bits that are coming off. The green that I wrote with. And I super sharpened a pencil before today so that I could have a really fine line to scratch back into this with. And I actually, for this, selected a different pencil to use. This is a sketch and wash pencil. So just like the Marabou mixed media crayons are water soluble, this is also a water soluble pencil. So the graphite lines that I'm making right now will also move around when I touch them with water. And look how fun that scratching away is there. Getting a nice line. So I did this on a kind of an impromptu live stream on Mix. I showed doing this where when you're scribbling, if you want to get that more organic scribbly shape that doesn't look so tightly controlled, to hold whatever you're working with very loosely. So it's almost bouncing around in your hand. And you then tend to be a little bit more relaxed. You're moving more of your arm. In art therapy, we talk about this as like the kinesthetic process of art making, right? Like my body is involved. I'm moving my arm and my wrist, not just my fingers as I'm making marks. You're getting your art workout right now with some scribbling. Okay. And now again, since this is water soluble, I'm going to go up next to where the marabou is, and I'm just going to kind of choose some of the spots where I'm going to blend the graphite and blend the marabou, but I'm not going to do it everywhere so that I'll be able to let some of it set and it'll stay put. And then of course I can go back in with some other materials later. I want to be careful of my text so that I'm not blending away the lines of my haiku. But like here, where I went over that stitching, I want to make that F a little more clear. So I can do that with the paintbrush. This also works if you're working on a very textured piece of paper, like some of the scrap papers that you got in your ephemera pack. The marabou might skip over that surface a little bit, so you can always use a paintbrush and a little water to help it fill in the gaps there. Other spots. And probably what I'll end up doing later is going back in with some of these colors that are coming through from the other side, so I can bring a little bit of that apricot-like color into this. So the text that was from the other side, it's still there, but it's not the main focus. In a bit, I'll turn this journal page sideways so we can look at that text and see if any of it wants to be highlighted in any way. So we have your most, consider the recent popularity of gray and light neutral palettes. Gray is the color of hibernation and winter. Gray is also the color of my parrot. So, and I'm not particularly fond of hibernation or winter. So I'm just going to make that go away and go over it with a lot of graphite. I like the color gray, but winter is not my best month. Maybe it'll be better this winter because I'll live somewhere that has a heater instead of a wood burning stove. This was a very cold winter. It's actually been a very cold summer too, so. So before I set this aside, I like to go in and see is there any spots where that marabou mixed media stuff is kind of clumping up on the surface, and I'll just use my paintbrush to brush it around and spread it. Even though when it is clumped up on the surface, it will harden eventually, but I know I'm probably going to come back to this sooner than later, so. The brush also helps with spots where your words go across the gutter of the page, so that you can make it do one letter. All right. So looking at this, I think the part that I'm most satisfied with is where that Marabou mixed media stuff is coming up against the stitches that are on the page and the way that the scratching away is working here. So I'm really enjoying that. I think this is a situation that calls for some wax paper. That'll probably stick together a little bit. All right, so we did one form of found poetry, and now we're going to do something a little bit different. Both of them are inspired by looking in the chat to see if anyone got it. No, okay. So both of these forms of poetry are inspired by the Surrealists. They did a lot of different word games and play with words. And one of the things that they would do for found poems would be to cut out lines from the newspaper, and they'd cut out a whole bunch of lines from the newspaper, they'd throw it up in the air, and then wherever it landed, that was the poem. And we're not quite going to go to that level, mostly because I don't think I can throw these effectively underneath the camera. But maybe you can try this in your space to just cut out some words from different sources. These here I have words from a book and words from an old magazine page because I liked the way the different typefaces look together, and I've got a little cluster of words and lines. And then what you do is figure out how you want to arrange them into some kind of writing. This is also something that's fun to do as a group. I know a few people like to art journal, maybe with their kids or with a friend. And so if that's you, you can do this together by each of you having a little handful of words, and one at a time, you write the poem by one person putting a word or phrase down, the next person does the next one, and then you work your way down the page. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of scramble these in my hands. This is standing in for throwing them up in the air. And we're not going to glue them down right away, so we'll have a little bit of editing time, and we'll see what we can come up with. And people have been asking about on Mix what to do when they feel stuck. This is a great thing to do when you feel stuck, because you can't plan this. Again, this idea of like not planning and letting yourself just enjoy the process. This is a great way to get into that. Okay, so I'm trying not to pick the big letters first, but let's see here. Okay, so this will be my pile. We'll put it down and see what we come up with. And I cut these out at 2 different times and just put them into an envelope. So I don't even remember what any of the text was about. It's just been clipped onto my light for a couple of days. I like how it ended. So let's see what we ended up with here. To a general effect, which recovers in a short time, after a brief rest, responds better again. But another part of the reduction is a learning process which persists. Come to where, right, you get a lot to like. Seem to react before did anything unusual. No conclusion can be drawn, therefore, but we may solve the problem by doing more tests. One interesting method of checking this was discovered rather by accident. When, as in all these tests, often leave their territories and wander, you get. It is also worth investigating as an example of a very quick learning process. are planning to continue this work for a number of seasons to come. If you heard, this is difficult to decide. Since these moving, this causes much commotion. Here you heard just right. So that worked out pretty well, kind of like what it ended up being. So I think for this, I'm going to put some matte medium down on this side of the page. And I'm just going to transfer the poem just as it is from one side to the other. And this is an ultra matte medium that I'm putting on right now. So I'm not going to brush this over the top because it might obscure some of this the smaller text. I'm just going to push it onto this just enough so that it stays put, and then I'll come back later with something that's a little more clear. So if you go see shows of surrealist artists or look at some books, you can see some of the poems that they did this way. Because they did save some of them. I'm sure there were many that ended up just kind of getting blown away or scattered away. I've also done this type of poetry writing with large groups of people, to do it with large groups of older adults, and we would end up with these like very profound statements. We would cut up like an entire newspaper, and everyone would have different headlines and different words from the headlines, and we would spontaneously write these poems, and they always ended up being just like, wow, that's really powerful. Again, not planned. Okay, so since I have the text there, I'm just going to put a little washi tape here. And on this side, this seems to be about change and study and decision, and then things working out in the end. So that's the kind of the feeling that I get from this, is like things are going to work out in the end. So on the rest of this page, I'm going to start out with, this is gray acrylic mixed in with matte medium. And I get these little bottles, and then I mix matte medium with a little bit of acrylic paint, and it just gives me something that's easy to use when I'm art journaling, right? I don't have to get out a whole tube of paint and a palette and a brush that has to get washed. I mean, I don't mind making big messes and cleaning up after them when I'm journaling, but when I'm live streaming especially, it's nice to have things like this that I can just grab. You all don't have to see me go over there and hunt for just the right thing.
Hey, Erin, there's some questions about the bottles with the brush and the lid. Where do you get those?
Oh, yeah, you can get them a lot of different places, sometimes at a hardware store, it's a good hardware store, sometimes at a paint store, sometimes at like if you just search online, like sometimes it comes from a medical supplier. They're just, if you search for small bottle with brush and lid, that should get you where you're going. Used to be able to get paints like that, like already ready to go, and glue also, which made so much sense. It's kind of like the paste containers we had when we were really little, except it has a brush instead of that. You'll remember, maybe some of you don't remember, but the paste had these like little spreading sticks and they weren't very effective. I can smell it right now talking about it. But yeah, I just got like a whole bunch of these little guys. Another place to check would be like an educational supply store. Because this is great for if you buy bulk bottles of things, then you can just put them in smaller containers. Okay, so when I think about something being just right, to me, that's kind of calming, right? It's not bigger than it needs to be. It's not smaller than it needs to be, kind of the Goldilocks situation. It's just right. And thinking about some of the pencils out that thinking about things being just right. For me, things feel just right when I have time and space to sit down and enjoy a cup of coffee in the morning. And even when everything is wild and crazy and lots of change, right? This little found poem seems to have some things that are about change, which is certainly a topic I resonate with in my life right now. I'm sure many of you do. One thing that I'm looking forward to and a change that's happening in my life is that I can kind of return to something I haven't gotten to do for a really long time, which is to wake up in the morning and have my coffee with the parrot before anything else, before I do anything else. So I just sketched a little coffee cup in with one of the medium pencils. And now I'm going in with this is I was cracking myself up the other day about this crayon. It's like a well-cured crayon. It was in the window of my old office for many years. So it's kind of bleached out on the outside, but the color itself still works. One of the things that I like to do in my art journal, but in my art in general, is I like to find ways that my new supplies and my old supplies can play well together. I'm going to peel the label off this crayon so you can just see how ridiculous it is. You can see where it got bleached out in the sun, but the wax is still the color. So it's like this really weird situation. Actually, I wonder if I can, yeah, it's not really enough. Oh, there's a little bit. See, everything, as we've said before, everything is a little bit of ephemera that you can use. And this little bit of crayon label that's bleached out from the sun, kind of a neat little thing to incorporate in on this page. So when I have a straight line and something else with a straight line, I like to try to match them up like that. I don't think there's really anything else here that's useful. One more little piece. Okay, so I have my lavender morning sky up there. Need something for some coffee here. So you can put your beverage of choice into this, or not that you all have to do coffee mugs, but thinking about what is that just right? If you had to make a symbol for something that is just right, the way that you know that something is comfortable and settled and exactly what you need.
Hey, Erin, this is Lee. Two things. Number one, we're about halfway through our session today. And then number two, question from the chat from Jill. Do you have any tips for keeping the amount of ephemera to a reasonable amount? She says, quote, I think I'm keeping too much.
Okay, so here's a way to do it. I kind of have cycles for my ephemera, right? So there's like the things that I use right there in the moment. There's the things that I kind of squirrel away. And then there's the things that have been sitting around the studio for a long time. If it's been sitting around in the studio for a long time and it's not useful, meaning it's not like a nice piece of paper that just needs to be filed away somewhere. It's like a weird little scrap that I thought I would use and it just never really got used. Those things, like I have an example over here. I have this cool thing. It's a bookmark. I liked this pattern, but it's seriously been sitting on my desk for, I don't know, 2 years over here in a little pile of things that I kept thinking I was going to incorporate in, and I haven't. So I am going to let it go. I'm going to give it to someone at a meeting I'm going to next week and say, here, incorporate this into your art. So I like to gift ephemera to other people if I'm not going to use it. I maybe am not the Marie Kondo and I would not get along. Let me say it that way. She would probably be horrified by me. But I think it's a good rule of thumb to kind of use things right away. The trouble that we can get into with ephemera is being too precious about it and feeling like you can't use it. And for me, that's usually the signal that like, oh no, I really need to use this because otherwise it's just going to sit here. And what is it doing just sitting here? So hopefully that's helpful. Another way for those of you who are kind of ongoing ArtJournalSnacks subscribers, which I love, you can think about every time it's time for a new journal, using that as a calendar cue to yourself to go through stuff. I do that every time we have a live stream. I kind of look at what's on my desk and say, like, am I really going to use this? Is it time to let this thing go? Is this actually just like a piece of trash that I thought would be interesting that I'm not going to end up using? Let's let it go. It's time to let it go. So a lot of times keying it to something you're already doing in a calendar. And to that end, have another little piece of something that could very easily become a piece of ephemera that would pile up. This is from coffee I had yesterday, and I cut up the plastic cup because I really liked the message on here. And it's one of those little objects that could very easily just sit around for a long time. So in the interest of practicing what I preach, I'm going to glue it in right now. Not wait for a better use, but just decide I'm going to use it right now.
There's a suggestion in the chat from Sarah L. Ephemera exchange again on Mix ? So
yeah, so journaling with other people. Next week I'll be at a meeting of I think it's 12 of us now, 12 other art therapists. 2 of them are in the ArtSnacks world, also subscribers of various sorts. And we always bring extra things to pass along to each other. So it's a great opportunity. We call them art gifts. And it's just like, I found this little thing that you must want to collage. Here it is. Usually everyone gives me bird things. but that's a great way to pass something along, because something you aren't using might be someone else's treasure. Okay, so I'm just fiddling with this a little bit because it's tacky glue and I want to make sure it fits okay. Oops. Sorry, my wax paper was just out of reach. So I'll put a little wax paper over that to let that dry. And so I had another poem I wanted to share with you all. This is a written poem. So another thing that you can do in your art journal is think about incorporating a poem that you really love. And I have lots of poems that I love, and there have many, many bits of poetry on art journal pages, but I looked online to see if I could find a poem about a journal, and I found a poem about a journal by a poet that I love. So this is What's in My Journal by William Stafford. Odd things like a button drawer, mean things, fish hooks, barbs in your hand, but marbles too. A genius for being agreeable. Junkyard crucifixes, voluptuous discards, space for knickknacks, and for Alaska. Evidence to hang me or beatify. Clues that lead nowhere, that never connected anyway. Deliberate obfuscation, the kind that takes genius. Chasms in character, loud omissions. Mornings that yawn above a new grave. Pages you know exist, but you can't find them. Someone's terribly inevitable life story, maybe mine. And I just love that. And I think it's, William Stafford is writing about a journal, like a written journal. But I think the way that it's written says so much about the art journaling process too, right? Because Stafford is talking about it as far as like collection of life experiences in the written word. And in an art journal, it's not just the written word, but all the little bits of ephemera as well, right? William Stafford is writing about the ephemera metaphorically, and we're using it literally in our art journals. So when I'm incorporating a poem, I'll glue it in. A lot of times I rip the edges like this so it'll start to weave into the page. And then I'll usually read it again once it's in and kind of decide, are there parts of this that I really want to call out, that I want to have be the main part of the art response. So the marbles line really jumped out at me. This idea of clues that lead nowhere, I thought that was an interesting line. And the pages you know exist but can't find them, that's definitely been an experience I've had in my art journals. Like, didn't I do something? Isn't it in here somewhere? And then this idea of an inevitable life story. And that one really stood out to me because I think a lot about like what's meant to be or not, and how do things happen, and how do we know if we're on the right path? And so this idea of a life story being inevitable, really, I'm interested in that. So I wanted to do something about that word inevitable on this other page. If you're working with a poem that you just love, again, reading it and looking for what are the images that this poet has written about, and how might I incorporate them into this page. I also have a paint chip here, and the color is called Sense of Wonder. And that just seems to be in conversation with this poem as well. So what I'm doing right now is kind of building up some of the visual architecture of this page, the things that'll support whatever expressive marks I end up making. Now, one other thing that seems to be in conversation with these polka dots and with this idea of a sense of wonder. This is from ephemera from the hardware store. Thank you, hardware store. Along with the paint chips, I got one of those things that tells you about the different paints. And this sea urchin, it's really beautiful. It also makes me think of, I was watching a documentary a little while ago about some fancy restaurant somewhere, and the fisherman was talking about bringing the chef subpar urchins because he didn't really want to do the job. I thought that was a very funny phrase, subpar urchins. Okay, so there's a starting point, and other part of this that I wanted to pull forward was clues that lead nowhere. So I thought having kind of a meandering line around this page, and this will help link the page together. Letting the line go off in some areas and come back in. And I didn't say this before, but the pigment that was already on this page, I saturated this book in a couple different kinds of alcohol ink and out of the refills and watercolor ink, and just let it bleed onto the pages in different ways so that this book didn't have any blank pages to start with, not truly blank. A little spot over here with some yellow line. Sometimes my little swirly lines end up looking kind of awkward, so I'll just layer a couple more over top. Okay, I like that. And then back to this word inevitable. It wants to be on here somewhere, but I'm not sure where, but actually I think the abstract 3D liner that we got might be a way to do it. This is always the teaching / live streaming fear when you're writing a word slowly that you will make a misspelling. So I always go a little slower than I normally would because you all are watching. So if you have to break up a word, think about what the word is and how it will look broken up. So I thought about stopping at the T and moving it on, but then it would have table in it. And I like this better, to have the word able be legible here. Okay, so inevitable. All right, so this is a page I'll probably come back to. I'll probably add a little bit more red pigments, maybe I'll do that right now. Even though the clues lead to nowhere, I feel like there needs to be an X marks the spot on this line somewhere. Yeah, so I'll probably go back in with some more red pigment, maybe pull some of the text, so maybe put a little color behind some of the text here, probably a little bit of the color from the urchin into the rest of this page. So, but this is a good beginning of this page. Okay, so what I would like to do now is see if, before I go on to another example I wanted to share, is see if anyone wanted to share. I don't want to have myself blah-blahing. If there are people that would like to share and ask questions. So why don't we take a little time for that, and then I'll show a couple more things before we close today.
Looks like Darla has her hand up, so let's replace the spotlight. There you go. You can unmute yourself though.
Hi, everybody. So I think we've chatted before in past live streams about how I like to use things from mailers and whatnot, you know, free labels, you know, address labels or whatever the case may be, using ephemera where you can get it. But one of the things that I've been having fun with for the past couple of years is cutting out and saving, when I'm not returning the envelope, is cutting out the lines underneath that stamp area, and just the line, you know, square section. And that is stripe collector, is that what it's called? Okay. Yeah. But that comes in handy from time to time when I'm struggling with maybe making the page feel finished or complete. Sometimes it's fun to just put that in cockeyed and, you know, stick it in the corner or something, and all of a sudden that page feels finished or comes alive. And I just wanted to share that little tidbit because, you know, I don't know about you, but I get a lot of those. They're asking for money or whatever the case may be.
Oh my goodness.
And these are piles. I mean, I've got a couple of jars of these actually, but there's different lengths, different colors of paper that they use. And you can see that some of them are wide, some of them are kind of on the thicker side. These are really old ones that my sister passed away in January, and I was going through her belongings, and these I think came from the state. They were looking for her to fill out some forms or paperwork or something, and she never did. So she had these still sitting in her paperwork, and I'll tell you, this is like gold to me. I mean, these are super precious, and I'm going to be waiting for the very best moment to use them because they're just so unique, in my opinion. Especially the red ones. The black one, yeah, but I mean, there's yellow. I've run across blue mailer envelopes. Occasionally, once in a blue moon, I see it like a green one or like a turquoise, and that's pretty cool. But I just wanted to share that in case you guys wanted to try incorporating something new into yours. But you can see even the smaller ones. This is a very narrow one, and there can be some fun use for that. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you for sharing that, Darla. I think we're all in awe. It's amazing. What a cool collection of stuff. I love the mail. So this is just giving me a whole different way to look at the junk mail that comes in. And I think you've maybe inspired a bunch of us to start cutting up the mail in that way. How cool. Wow, great way to make use of the ephemera that comes in through your mailbox.
Very cool. Jill has her hand up, so let's go to Jill.
Hello. So yeah, I'm the one that has way too much ephemera, but I did just put something precious in my book. You know, I think I just have more ephemera than I do journals. Like I'm only working in one journal, so I have too much stuff, but I did put some precious stuff in that I really like. I'm actually working on a little poem up here, but this actually came in the ephemera pack with the ArtJournalSnacks. And this has two sides, so I actually made a copy, photocopied. So I have the other side too, so I don't feel like I wasted it. But one of the things I love to collect is security envelopes, and I cut them open, and you end up with all sorts of different colors and windows and pattern. I have a red one. So, and I have literally a drawer full of these. So yeah, I'm trying to get my ephemera under control. I do need to go through them and just essentially parse out what's worth keeping and what's not. So thank you for that. But yeah, I just want to share that. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing it, and thank you for setting the example of using the ephemera, even if it's precious, because that's what it's for. That book that some of you got pages from, that one was a little precious for me to give, but it's one of those things that's been sitting here in the studio with every intention of like making a bunch of art from it, and it's just been here. So I'm glad to pass it along to all of you with the caveat that I want you to use it. So thank you for sharing that.
Looks like we got another person's hand up. Shelly, let's bring you. Welcome to the program. Here we go.
Hi. So Jill, you beat me to it, but here's my envelopes. So I do the same thing. I've made a couple of spreads, really cool patterns that you can get. So that was just what I was going to share. But I was like, oh, Jill, you stole my thunder. But you know, but still, and then sometimes I save the envelopes too, just because I like the colors of them. So yeah, I think I got so many, they're all buried, but yeah, that's what I got. So nice talking to y'all and seeing y'all in person. Bye.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So I see that Sarah shared her haiku in the chat. Sarah, would you like to read it, or would you like me to read it? Okay. Loud art making voice, make them uncomfortable, be true to myself. Very powerful. Art journaling haiku for sure. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So I have one other thing I'd like to play with for a little while. If you go back to the studio desk. Okay, so one thing that I do sometimes to just kind of get myself ready to write and to write a little more poetically in my art journal is I'll just put some lines in and I'll just let them sit there, right? I don't have a plan when I'm doing it. I'm just kind of thinking like, well, maybe some text will go here, right? And this is different than, I'll show you a different page. This is more journaling writing, right? I've got some writing here. I was just kind of stream of consciousness writing. I wasn't intentionally being poetic. I was just writing the things that were coming to mind as they were coming to mind. With something like this, I'm thinking about wanting to have a space for writing that is a little, again, a little more structured, maybe a little poetic, doesn't have to rhyme. So I worked with an older adult who, I may have talked about him before. He liked to argue. He really liked to argue with me. And I found out after a while that he just got energized by arguing and loved it. So he could argue about everything, but he would come to poetry group and he did not like it at first because sometimes we read poems that didn't rhyme. And he would just sit there and go, it's not a poem if it doesn't rhyme. I don't understand this. And we would all be like, well, no, there's lots of poems that don't rhyme. So if you're saying that to yourself, remind yourself that poems don't have to rhyme and they can be whatever they are. It's just about using language in an expressive way. So just like we do with our brushes and our markers, we're using mark making in an expressive way. Poetry is just using your words in an expressive way. So sometimes I'll start with just one word. And then each line is kind of a response to the line above it. That's how I think about it. So change, I am ready, I am fearful, I am a survivor, I can make change, I can be at peace with new things. So giving yourself a series of lines, writing each line one at a time, again, without planning and without editing, and trying to just make each line in response only to the one above it. So that might mean that there's a little bit of repetition, especially if there's something going on for you that's kind of occupying a lot of space in your head. That's fine as well. Again, you're not editing, you're not censoring yourself. You saw me maybe hesitate a little bit there as I was writing, and I noticed that. Maybe you noticed that too. That's normal. Try to just let that hesitation be and then write the next word. So in thinking now about what I've written, I'm thinking about what I want to do on the rest of this page, what other marks I want to make. And I know that this acrylic paint pen will create a little bit of a resist, but I'm thinking about the theme of what I've written, which is about change and the ambivalence that can show up with change sometimes, right? It can be a little bit awkward. And one of the things that's so great about the art process, and especially about art journaling, is that the pages can contain all of that, right? They can contain the beautiful things and also the difficult stuff, right? Like all of those feelings can be present at the same time on the same page. So I've got these kind of bright yellow marks that are happy and exciting. And then the awareness that change can feel a little bit scary. So I'm using one of the pencils that we got in the summer box. This is a 4B, so medium softness. To just kind of put in a human figure, not worrying too much about details, just kind of suggesting one here, standing here. Facing the words. And having some thoughts. So sometimes it's fun to put the speaker of the poem into the page. So if you have a favorite poem that you're incorporating into your art journal, maybe find a photograph of that poet. Or if the poem is written from the perspective of a creature or a place, adding that in so that the poem has somewhere it's coming from, somewhere it's speaking from. Okay. So for this, because the content of this, I want this figure to be grounded. I want it to be standing somewhere. Feels important. And then, like I was saying, because this page is about change, it's a great opportunity to play with the material. That we don't have a lot of control over. So doing rubbings is one, because especially in your art journal, and many of you have noticed this, that if you do rubbings on pages that have things on the other side, you start to get some of what's on the other side coming through, and I love that. This sometimes can take a little bit of learning on your part if art journaling is new to you and you're used to like working on one piece of paper at a time. This way of working might feel a little bit chaotic or maybe a little bit anxiety inducing, because you're like, I didn't mean for that to come through on this page, or I didn't want that to happen. And you'll get to the point, I hope, that actually feels like what you're wanting, right? You want the unexpected, you want the interesting messes. Okay, so I'm going to put a whole bunch of green here on this page and a little bit of salt. Because again, this idea of using the material to have some of the metaphor of what your page is about. So salt into watercolor, and this idea of change, it's a process, right? I have to let the salt do its thing. I can't hurry it up. And I also can't control how it will end up looking in the end. But the green that I'm putting on this page now feels a little more positive. It's a manageable change. So I will name aloud something that happens for me when I'm working on a page. If I kind of go to a place that's like, ooh, I didn't know if I wanted to talk about that or make a page about that. A lot of times just keep going, keep working with the materials, and you'll find your way to a place that feels maybe a little more comfortable. I was saying to someone the other day, a lot of times we know what we need as far as the art materials, like we know what we need. We just have to let ourselves use the materials, let ourselves have some time to play and create. Because as I was writing this, I was feeling a little bit worried about change. But now when I look at the whole page, I'm like, it's going to be okay. Look at all these bright colors. It's going to be just fine. All right. I'm going to go back to, try not to create sometime I should set up a time lapse to show like what I'm doing here with all this stuff in the background. Okay, I want to come back to this now that this has dried a little bit. And just go in with a little bit more wax pan. Someone asked last week about some of the texture that I had gotten on a page, and it was the heavy matte medium, or a very matte medium. I let it dry. I keep a lot of like brush strokes in it, so I don't smooth it out all the way. And then going over the top, you can do this with colored pencil or with wax crayon like I'm using right now. And I just think this texture is fascinating. I've been using it a lot because I think it's so interesting. It looks ancient, right? It looks very vintage and like you dug it up from somewhere, unearthed it from an interesting drawer. I would be curious to see how this might interact with some of those postal stripes, right? If you put those, because they're very geometric, if you put those down and then put them that medium over the top, then you get this more organic line work that would come over the top of that. That might be really interesting to see. Okay. So now this poem looks like it lives on this page a little bit more. Again, I'll probably go in with some other media once the glue is dried on my mug here. I'll probably go in and add some highlights in. And maybe since this ended up being about having coffee with the parrots, maybe Griffin and Sammy will be in the background of this mug. We'll have to see. I'll have to see how the page evolves, but I'll share it on Mix when it's done. So I really like using either oil pastels or the marabou crayons or wax crayon or colored pencil to just, it's just a way to put a little bit of finishing into your page and help all the different elements incorporate together. Watercolor works really well for that too, but sometimes you don't want to add more water-based media onto a page. So I just like to kind of go in and see where I can use one color across the whole page to tie the different parts together. And I can see it into the center of this page. I can see that little white stripe in there. So I'm just going to put a little, the same watercolor that I was using on the coffee into the gutter of the page there. You can see how the matte medium and then the wax crayon both act as a little bit of a resist. You can especially see it right there, where the watercolor is settling on the matte medium and also onto the original paper of the page. So it's darker there and then lighter where it's settling on the matte medium. There's so many different ways that you can combine materials. And if you're interested in creating mixed media art, I really think that art journaling is such a wonderful way to do that. Art journaling is also a wonderful way to keep yourself organized and document your life. And there's so many benefits to it that, you know, I would need to maybe write a whole other book about the things that I've learned through so many years of art journaling. And I'm so grateful to be sharing them with all of you. So I wanted to turn back to the whole room now and see if there were any lingering questions or people that want to share now that you've had a little bit more time, and see where everyone is.
Looks like Darla Joe. Let's welcome her to the program here.
I'm back. I just wanted to share, a couple of years ago, I was playing around with doing a lot of acrylic pouring, and I don't know, just experimenting with the pours. I would mix my own liquid acrylics with water and I think it's some sort of acrylic paint extender. That ends up making it kind of rubbery after it dries. And I poured it onto the inside of wide glass ashtrays to let it dry up. And then I finally ran across them again a couple of weeks ago and picked at the edges to start getting it lifted up. And I was able to make this fun page
Oh, fun.
with acrylic metallic paint on the paper. And then I trimmed these out in the best I could, that I was able to salvage anyway, into a circle shape, and kind of made a fun spacey theme with it. So this is all acrylic, and it's paper thin, as you can see when I picked it off of the glass, and it was flexible and still kind of rubbery, but all I had to do was take some of my when I do collaging, I use this gel, heavy gel medium. The heavier one has less water in it and less chance of the paper, you know, having puckering issues. But anyway, I just wanted to share that. I had kind of some fun with it. The adjacent page, I did some watercolor with one of my new favorite colors. It's a quinacridone. It was a series of Quin colors for the fall. And that yellow, that orangey yellow was just so beautiful. I could not resist to keep using it. I didn't want to waste it. So I slapped it on here and then tore off some watercolor paper to put on top and use that. Would you call it, a bonus prompt that I haven't filled out yet. I just got done finishing up the page, but I'm going to go ahead and fill in some words and journal right over the top of that. And it just made for a fun couple of pages there, and I wanted to share that. So if you guys ever feel like you want to spice up a page with leftover acrylic paints that you can liquid down and move around and stuff, I'm wondering if you don't have any of that liquid acrylic extender, if maybe something like Elmer's glue mixed in with it perhaps could be helpful. Well, anyway, you can even put it on wax paper, deli paper, and peel that off. And then once you peel it off, you can even trim shapes with it. It's just fun, and it's flat, so you can easily put it in your journal without it taking up too much space.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
That page came out so beautifully with the balance of colors from side to side. So I saw the request from Rodney to read the Change poem. Change, I am ready, I am fearful, I am a survivor. I can make change. I can be at peace with new things. Sometimes I edit myself in the reading of it. But you can see, we go back to the studio desk real quick. You can see some of what the salt is starting to do. It's starting to do its magic. Yeah. So yeah, trying to get into the place that it focuses, but salt is starting to work its magic. What's cool is like some of the other pigment from this book has very thin paper. So some of the stuff, pigment from the other side is coming through. So even though it's salt into green paint, there's like some red and some brown that's showing up in there. So wonderful, unexpected things that can happen with the art materials. All right, so we are coming towards our close. I hope you had some fun playing with poetry today. And you know, bottom line, I think there's different ways to think about writing poems, things that are coming from you, that are you expressing yourself with words as though they were brushstrokes. Finding poems in existing text. So thinking about how you can not read the text, but rather kind of hunt for the words that end up being poetic or meaningful in some way to you, and then read it as a poem. And then incorporating poems that you love. Your art journal is a wonderful way to celebrate some of those beautiful poems that you love to hear or read. Song lyrics absolutely count as well. So maybe it's a couple of lines from a song, or maybe the entire song that you want to incorporate. You print it out. There's also something really lovely about writing the poem yourself. So writing it in your own hand. Those are some different ways to use poetry, and I hope you give them all a try. Please do share your haikus with us on Mix if you have the chance. Even better, share the art journal page that you made using the haiku form. And I will see you all on Mix, and I will see you again for another live stream very soon. So we have kind of two back-to-back. So I'll see you again very soon. And the information about the next live stream is on Mix, and I look forward to it. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us.